Good morning, everyone. It is 4 after 10, so we're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you for joining us for the next steps at Advancing Race Equity Training presented by the Connecticut Race Equity Network. I am Amber Freeman. I am the Interim Director of Training, Technical Assistance, and Community Impact at the Connecticut Coalition to End Homelessness. So for today's training, we really just wanted to have a training to introduce who CT-REN is, as well as continue to have work to advance race equity. We know that we started having a lot of race equity trainings a few years ago, and just to have a training to talk about what is next, right? We have the trainings, that was the beginning, that is not the end. So what do we do next to continue to advance race equity? What do we do so that we can actually see some change within our sector? So that's what we're going to touch on for this training, and then we will be having additional trainings following. Because this is a webinar, you all are actually not able to put information in the chat, but if you can, put the information into the Q&A panel. It is a webinar, so we are not able to see everyone. So if you can, enter your name, your preferred nouns, pronouns, your race equity. You can send it in the Q&A panel and it'll come just to us. We would like to see, get an idea of who it is that is attending this training today. So we have, some of our presenters are not able to join us. However, I still have them here because they have been instrumental with putting together this training. So some of our presenters from CT-REN today is Felicia Adams, who is the Senior Program Manager with the Corporation for Supportive Housing. We have Carlene Carmelis, who is our Collective Impact and Equity Director with the Partnership for Strong Communities. Myself, Amber Freeman, again, I am the Interim Director of Training, Technical Assistance, and Community Impact at CCEH. We also have Margaret Middleton, who I hope joins us, who is the Chief Executive Officer at Columbus House. Janita Hayes, who's not able to join us today, but Janita has been really strong with CT-REN. She is a Partner Support Manager at Thought Partner Solutions. Sonia Jouts is here, who's the CT Director at Corporation Supportive Housing. Luz Azuba, please give me grace, is the Senior Program Manager with the Corporation for Supportive Housing. And then we have Bobby Riddick joining us, who is the Race Equity and Community Impact Program Manager at the Connecticut Coalition to End Homelessness. So before we fully get into our training, I'm just going to go over some housekeeping. Because this is a webinar, you all are all muted, but this is being recorded. We will have a part where we have discussions. We're going to be asking for feedback. You all can raise your hand if you would like to be unmuted, and you can also send me a message if you would like to unmute. You can also submit any type of feedback or questions that you have inside of the Q&A box. And we'll be sure to get to that, and we'll also be having a Q&A segment at the end of the presentation. So we have a very heavy agenda today, and I hope we get to everything. So our agenda today consists of going over what equity and practice guidelines are. We're going to be talking about the 7 key steps to advance race equity. We're going to go over some race equity terms, as it's important that we all are on the same page and we all have the same type of principles and understanding. Then we're going to have a data review. We're going to talk about the Connecticut Race Equity Network, so you all can have an understanding of who we are as a group. We're going to have a discussion part and action steps. What can we do next to really put in the work and bring action to the different things that we have been talking about for a while now. And then lastly, we're going to have a call to action so that we can all work together and actually put in some action and put in some work. So before we actually get started, again, we can't see you all, but we do want to check in. If you all can put in the Q&A box, or if anyone wants to unmute, and tell us, what are you most excited about learning from the Connecticut Race Equity Network? How comfortable do you feel about talking about race equity? We know it's not an easy topic to talk about. We know it's not comforting at times, but how comfortable do you feel? What work has your organization been engaged in around race equity thus far? And do you feel supported in your role to work towards advancing race equity? So again, this is a webinar. When you all send messages to me, the organizer, I can't, your name, your information is not shared to others, and I will share your information anonymously. All right, so people are putting their names, great. I'm getting some feedback. Some people are interested in learning the benefits from the perspective of others. Great, as we are going to be discussing that. Some are comfortable. It is a topic that needs to be discussed, and there should be more trainings. Absolutely. Anyone else? How are you all feeling? Interested in getting others' life experiences, most excited about learning about the race equity data, comfortable talking about it, but need guidance on how to move the issues. Yes, we all need guidance. That is why we are having this sort of training, and we plan on having additional trainings. Some are comfortable. I've been with my organization, they're learning about it. Okay, great. So it seems as though we have some type of comfort in talking about it. It seems like people are anxious and want to learn, but we just need some more guidance on what to actually do, what the next steps are, which is why we are having this training. So this training is really a overview, and we will be having additional trainings that really go into more detail. No, unfortunately for this, I'm responding to a question. There is not a chat feature. It is a Q&A feature because we are doing a webinar. And I will just say thank you all for working with us as I switched this to a webinar. We really wanted this initially to be very engaging, but because of the large amount of people that wanted to join, we decided to switch it to a webinar so that people can join. But we will be having additional trainings that will be smaller and more engaging as we dig in deep into some topics. All right, so I'm going to continue on. Thank you all for providing that feedback. So we're going to start, and it's good when you're talking about any type of race equity to really follow some certain guidelines. So we're going to go over equity and practice guidelines. I included this picture here because I think it really speaks to what equity is and how that differs from equality, right? So in the picture, you see equality. Everyone has a box, everyone's at the game, they're at the fence, they're at the game, right? It's fair. However, equity is giving people what they need so that they can have an equal vision, so they can have an equal start, so that they have, so it's fair all around. So the person that's shorter, he needs a little bit more so that he can see over that fence. The other person, he needs just enough so that he can see too. So if someone is starting at some type of disadvantage, meet them where they are and give them what they need. So then it can be fair, it can be equitable. So we're going to go into equity and practice guidelines. And this is something that we really try to incorporate as a network for CT-REN. And it's important to, as you're working towards equity, have a good understanding of these guidelines. So for equity and practice guidelines, one of the first things is to try one. That's what we're going to ask you all to do today. Try one when we're talking about equity. So it's the invitation to be open-minded to others' ideas, feelings, worldviews, and ways of doing things so greater, so that exploration and understanding are possible. Just try it. Some things are going to fit, some things are not, but be open-minded. Experience discomfort. As we were checking in to see how everyone is feeling, how comfortable is everyone about having these conversations. It's also important to experience discomfort. So it's natural for some to feel uncomfortable, but don't run from the discomfort, right? Don't run from being uncomfortable, and don't rescue anyone. So when you have those moments of when you're uncomfortable, that's often what it takes in order to bring change. So we have to get to a point when we are comfortable being uncomfortable. Okay, another practice is to move up, move up. So basically, if you find yourself speaking loudly and often, you want to move up your listening. If you're quiet and you're a little bit more laid back, you want to move up your verbal participation. So stepping outside of your comfort zone so that true change can come. So move up, whatever it is that you may need to do in your areas. Next guideline is to be aware of intent and impact. So it is very possible to be well-intentioned, but still say and do hurtful things. So just reflect, check yourself if necessary, but just be aware that although your intent may be well, it can still have a negative impact on someone else. Another guideline that we practice is to practice both and thinking. So it's seeing that more than one reality or perspective can be true at the same time. So a perspective, it can be both, it can be and, it doesn't have to be your way, it doesn't have to be their way. Both and thinking. Notice content and the process. So you want to notice both. What we say, how, why we say or do something, and how the members of the group react. So the whole process is not just the information, but pay attention to the facial expressions, pay attention to body language, pay attention to who's engaging, who's not engaging as you are having conversations about race or equity. It's the content which you're going over, but the full process as well. And then practice self-focus. So listen to your internal thoughts, feelings, and reactions. This is something that cannot be solved in a day. It's not something that is, we can have one meeting and you can create a solution. It also comes from inside yourself. So practice self-focus. Listen to your thoughts, your feelings, and your actions. Expect and accept non-closure. So hang out in the uncertainty. It is completely okay to not know, to not have an answer, to not have an initial response, to not have a solution. You don't want to rush to quick solutions, especially in relations to racial understanding. So we're talking about years and years and years of systemic racism. We're talking about discrimination. We're talking about inequities. That's not something that can be solved in a meeting. That's not something that you can put a time frame on, right? So just expect and accept non-closure. It's okay to not respond right away or have a solution, but to continue to put in the work. And then lastly, create a safe, brave space. So there is a difference between safety and comfort, right? Just because you're uncomfortable, that doesn't mean you're not safe. Each person has to be responsible for their own safety and discomfort. I briefly went over these guidelines. However, as I said, this is our first one, very high level, but we will be going into more detail and always following the equity and practice guidelines. All right, so something that goes along with that last one that I said about safety and comfort, I think this quote right here is really great, and it really speaks to what it takes to advance race equity. So As adult learners, we are each responsible for our own physical and emotional safety. Often in situations of cross-cultural disagreement, individuals may assume that they are unsafe when in reality they are simply uncomfortable. Demonstrate bravery and lean into that discomfort so that we can each remain engaged and move forward together. So that is what I challenge all of you to do. Lean into that discomfort so together we can remain engaged and move forward. So there are 7 key steps to advance race equity. And these steps it doesn't have to be done in a linear fashion. It doesn't have to be done where you go from step 1 to step 2. You can work on each of these steps all at the same time. But again, it is putting in the work and doing something so that there's some action behind. And we'll go into more detail. Today, we're really going to start with step 1, where we're establishing an understanding of race equity and inclusion principles. It is necessary to have a true understanding of the terms, of the principles, and as a sector, having a true understanding and being on the same page. So we're going to spend a lot of time talking about step 1 today. Also, step 2 is engage affected populations and stakeholders. This is something that requires, to have individuals of lived experience. Also, for people of color to be at the table, to have equitable practices where you're having a seat for others, but you also want to do it in a way where you're not tokenizing the person. That will also be a training that we will do following. Step 3, gather and analyze disaggregated data. We're going to be going over our data today. Our data, well, some of the data, but look at the data. The data tells the story. Look at your data, see if there are any type of inequities. What does your data show? What stories does it tell? Analyze your data to see and dig deeper. Step 4, when you're talking about advancing race equity, is to conduct system analysis of root causes of inequities. Question things, dig deeper. Why are there inequities? If our data is showing something, why is that happening? How can we get to the root and what can we do about it? Step 4, identify strategies and target resources to address. I did that, I'm sorry. What step am I on? Step 6, step 5. Identify strategies and target resources to address root causes of inequities, And then step 6, conduct race equity impact assessment for all policies and decision making. Look at things with a race equity lens. Consider that in your policies and your practices for our overall sector, as well as within your organization. And then step 7 is to continuously evaluate effectiveness and adapt strategies. It is not something that is done one time. It is a continuous process. So continuously work on all of the different steps and continuously evaluate where we stand. So those are just the 7 steps to advance race equity. We have a lot of work to do, but we are starting. And this is a very high level overview today. We're going to emphasize really step 1 and step 3. All right, at this point, I am going to hand it over to Felicia.
Good morning, and thank you all again for being here with us today. We really appreciate you spending some time with us to discuss this topic. So racial equity terms, we want to start here by building a good foundation. So the importance of a shared language is critical when navigating the topic of racial equity. A shared language assures that we are referring to the same issues when we use the same terms. Sometimes this work can get sidelined or derailed when people assume that they're using the same terms with the same intent. So a shared language provides a clear pathway toward effective communication and working effectively through some of these issues. So starting at the top, racism. We pulled these definitions from the Race Equity Toolkit, and a link will be provided in the chat for you to go through and really dig deeper into some of these terms and many others. And we don't really have the time to go into each definition completely. Really, each one could be its own training. There's so much information to share and discuss for each of these terms. But starting with racism. Racism is racial prejudice that combines social and institutional power. It's one group having power over another. It's a system that's based on race, a racial advantage, and at the same time also based on racial oppression. Racism is a white supremacist system. Power is the ability to influence others or impose one's belief. If one group has power over the other, that impacts the way policies and procedures are implemented to the detriment of the group that is not empowered. Anti-racism is the active work of opposing racism. So attending trainings is a good thing to build your knowledge base, but to be an anti-racist, you have to be active in this work. Next slide, please. BIPOC. I'm sure this is a term that we've all been hearing since 2019, 2020. It's Black, Indigenous, or people of color. Sometimes it's shortened to POC or people of color, but BIPOC, it leads explicitly with Black and Indigenous identities. It helps center the anti-Black racism and the invisibilization of Native communities. Racial equity is the condition that would be achieved if one's racial identity no longer predicted in a statistical sense how one fares. And racial justice. Racial justice is not just the absence of discrimination, but also the presence of deliberate systems and supports to achieve racial equity. Again, a link will be in the chat for you to go through and get more complete definitions to all of these terms. And you can use this as a resource to share with your colleagues to get a better understanding for yourself, and then to be able to have clear communication going forward. So what is a native land acknowledgement? This is a formal statement that recognizes and respects Native peoples as the traditional stewards of the land that we currently live on. The purpose is to highlight the existing relationship between Native people and their traditional territories. It's important for us to recognize the land that we currently live on because as the state of Connecticut, it was all once Native territory, and it's our duty to acknowledge it. It's important to understand this very long and interconnected history between us and the land and how it's brought us here today, and to better understand our place in that history. There will be a link available in the chat so that you can get more information about where you're currently living. So as we would like to move forward with giving a Native land acknowledgement. And full disclosure, this acknowledgement came from the UConn website. They've done a lot of research on the different tribes of the areas. So we would like to begin by acknowledging the land on which we gather is the territory of the Mohegan, Mashantucket Pequot, Eastern Pequot, Schaghticoke, Golden Hill Paugussett, Nipmuc, and Lenape peoples who have stewarded this land throughout generations. We thank them for their strength and resilience in protecting this land and aspire to hold up our responsibilities according to their example. Thank you for your time today, and I would like to pass it on to Bobby.
Yes, hello, good morning, everyone. So in our next slide, we're going to talk a little bit about the story that our data tells us. We're going to review some of our racial disparities in our homelessness, look at our Connecticut landscapes, and also Connecticut housing cost burdens. Next slide, please. So in this slide, we're talking a little bit about representation, and we're looking at our populations, our race and ethnicity of those experiencing homelessness compared to the general population. So on our bottom bar, we see our US population, where we have our African American population, and our purple, we have our 2 or more races, American, Indian, Alaskan Natives, Native Hawaiians, Pacific Islanders, Asian, and in the gray, we have our white populations. And we see in this bar that African Americans make up 13% of our country's census in our country. This graph is also provided by the National Alliance to End Homelessness. In our top bar, we see representation in our homeless population, where we see that African Americans make up 39% and more than 50% of families with children experiencing homelessness represent our homeless population. And again, we also have our BIPOC representation of 2 or more races, American Indian, Native, Alaskan Native, Native Hawaiian, Pacific Islanders, Asian, and again, our white populations that are in our gray. And we see that in this graph that minorities make up a larger share of our homeless population than they do in the general population in our country. We can go to the next slide, please. Okay, so here in our in this graph, in this space here, we're looking at our landscape in the state of Connecticut. Or we're looking at our census population in Connecticut compared to race and ethnicity entering into homelessness. So we can see that African American population represent in the state of Connecticut 10.78%. In our homeless response system, African Americans represent 36.39% that are entering into homelessness. And our census for our Latinos and our Latin American populations, our state census is 17.29%. Entering into homelessness, our Hispanic and Latino populations represent 27.21% that are entering into homelessness. And in our state census for our white population, they're represented as 66.42%. In our homeless response system, the white population represents 41.24% that are actually entering into homelessness. So I wanted to provide on the next slide, please. So in this data, I wanted to provide also kind of a visualization of these numbers, and where we're looking at, our state census compared to our representation in our homeless response system. And we saw that on both national levels and both in our state census, that minorities make up a larger group or a larger share of our homeless population than they do in our general population. And that goes for our country and for our state. So hopefully this is a good visualization to kind of see when you're looking at your data points and looking at to compare our populations and our state census, but also to kind of spark conversations about the root causes of homelessness and how we can also move our work forward. Thank you. And I will pass on to Carlene.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Bobby, for highlighting the racial disparities within the homelessness system. I'm going to spend a few minutes providing an overview of the Connecticut Race Equity Network. But before I do that, I wanted to quickly provide some additional disparity data. So the National Low Income Housing Coalition recent gap report estimated in Connecticut 30% of renter households are extremely low income. For example, a household making up to $30,350 $530 with 4 people is considered as an extremely low income household. And 66% of the extremely low income renter household are severely housing cost burden, meaning they are paying more than 50% of their income on housing. Next slide, please. Breaking this information down by race and ethnicity, I want to offer two resources to you all today. One is this visual from the Joint Center for Housing Study of Harvard University, which shows that 31.4% of Black, 27.3% of Hispanic, 24.9% Asian, and 23.8% of white are severe housing cost burden. This is 2016 data, so it is a bit outdated. So the other resource I want to share with you all today, which you will receive a link in the chat shortly, is the National Equity Atlas, where you will be able to access some updated data, and I believe it is updated up to year 2019. And it's an interactive data dashboard where you can filter information. Next slide, please. Now moving on to the Connecticut Race Equity Network, which I will refer to as CTREN. CTREN was founded by Tajmia Bryant, formerly at CCH, Monique Price-Taylor, formerly at CSH, Janetta Hayes, Amber Freeman, and myself. The idea was conceptualized by Tajmia, and she got Monique engaged, and Monique pulled Janita into the work, and Janita pulled me into this work. And when Tajmia transitioned into her space, she brought in Amber, and when Monique transitioned into her current position, Sonia joined us as well. So when we first came together as a group, our focus was around how could we increase partnership, communication, and collaboration around the race equity work that needed to happen in the state. We had all participated in CSH Connecticut Race Equity Collaborative, and we knew that there was a lot of work to be done in this space. And as our respective organization was thinking about this work, we wanted to figure out a way to not only influence this work, but as well as figure out a way to help lead it. Thus, we got our organization's buy-in and began developing a charter for the network. So the purpose of CTREN is to advance the work of centering race equity efforts to address housing and homelessness disparity in Connecticut, to provide a platform for partners to share, collaboratively develop, and coordinate anti-racist projects and initiatives that advance racially equitable housing outcomes. And as a network, we truly value authenticity, cultural humility, anti-racism, respect, collaboration, transparent communication, and education. We utilize the space to really amplify current racial equity efforts that's happening within our organization, what's happening at the statewide level, as well as the federal level. And we help to prioritize we truly prioritize cross-sector collaboration and communication, help to advocate for equitable programs and resources, supporting each other's organizational work, sharing the knowledge that we are learning in different spaces that we are in, and providing a safe and brave space for BIPOC and allies to come together to meet and discuss this important issue. And then as a group, we truly believe in long-term learning and professional development. So we foster lifelong commitment to learning as a group. Next slide, please. There are 4 criteria by which we set our programs, policies, and activities, and these are access, analysis, action, and accountability. And in terms of access, does the BIPOC community have access to the resources that they need, such as information and data, professional development opportunities, funding, services, and support? And when I say community, I'm not only talking about the population that are seeking services, but also the individuals who are providing as well as advocating for the services that's needed. Analysis, as we are thinking about, are we doing root causes analysis? Are there any disparities within our practices, procedures, and policies that we are putting in place or have put in place that needs to be revisited? Action, what can we do really to help raise awareness around these core issues? how do we ensure that we have diversity and leadership at every table, like Amber referenced earlier? And what does that look like currently? And what does it need to look like? And how is our individual organization practicing and advancing anti-racism work and accountability? When we think about that, we think about it. Are we talking about what you need in the space to effectively do this work? Being open to asking for each other's help and support when you need it, because you don't have to do this work alone in this space. So truly utilizing each other's expertise to get the work done. And we believe in every network member to actively participate in the conversation and the work that's happening. And one of my favorite when it comes to accountability is the realization that we are all human beings with different capacities, different workloads. And so extending grace and compassion to everyone at a table is something that was really important to us as a group while we were developing our charter. And in terms of our structure, we have an advisory committee, which is run by a co-collaborative, and organizational membership includes CCH, CSH, PSE, the Housing Collective, and 3 rotating seats. So, and this group is responsible for the administrative support of the network. And then we have the network. The network is open to anyone who is interested in learning more about how to center race equity in their practice and their effort. And it consists of a broad coalition of cross-sector partners that's dedicated to this work. So everyone who is presenting today is a member of the network. And we have some additional members that you will get to meet in future workshops. And lastly, as a group, it was really important to us that as a member, you're not only representing your organization in this space and sharing their perspective, but also yourself, your life experiences and your professional experiences was really important as we are making decisions. So if anyone is interested in learning more about the network or how you can get involved and engage, at the end of the presentation, I believe we will be sharing a link for you all to fill out if you're interested some more. And now I'm going to pass it off to Sonia for our next section.
Hello. Thank you so much, Carlene. So my name is Sonia Jelks. I'm the director at CSH. And as you probably have found from this presentation, it was originally our hope to have a regular Zoom meeting so that we could have more interaction. Unfortunately, we had such a huge response that we moved over to a webinar just so we could accommodate additional people to join us. And so as we go through this discussion interaction part, I'm going to ask that you put your comments in the chat, or feel free to unmute or raise your hand so that we can actually hear your voice as we go through this section. Please help us to hear from you today. We have this time so that we can come together and continue this work. And we really want to hear what your thoughts are. So the first question that I'd like to have you respond to and provide some feedback is, in what ways has racism impacted people's ability to access safe and stable housing? And I know this is a question that we, through our various organizations, have struggled with and continue to talk through, and we're going to continue to ask this question until we come up with solutions that really does help to dispel and to combat racism in housing. So feel free at this time, if someone are there any hands up that someone want to shout out some areas that they'd like to express on how racism continues to affect people's ability to access safe and stable housing. Also feel free to put it in the chat, in the chat as well. Amber, if you and Carlene can let me know if you hear any dialogue or if there are any hands raised.
I don't see any hands up. yet, but let me check to see if anyone has any messages, and I will read it out. I will also read it anonymously.
And just so you're aware, we were going to do some breakout rooms so that we can kind of talk among ourselves. So you guys got to help me, give us some feedback. Part of what CT RAN's role and job is to make sure that we are taking dialogue and feedback from people who are interested or members to ensure that we're helping to dispel racism and discrimination, through our entire, state of Connecticut, throughout all of our processes, and specifically in housing. So please use this opportunity to give us some feedback so we can continue to look at what other things CT RAN can be doing to help in this work.
All right, great. So we have some folks, some people are saying, they're saying it's access to quality education leading to employment that can sustain housing. Also, a note that it's not only housing, but there's also racism in healthcare and education as well. Racism is the reason why some neighborhoods are wealthier than others, which means that some people have access to better education and even better food, access to housing, employment.
Those are all great thoughts, and we're definitely going to capture these. So as we're looking at future discussions and training, we can certainly make sure that these are areas that we continue to do research and provide information on. And as many of you have pointed out, racism obviously does extend beyond housing. Housing is unfortunately the area in which most of us are working in, but unfortunately, being one of those, high expensive areas that most of us, have to struggle through. If you're being impacted by racism, that it doesn't allow you to have stable housing, that's generally going to upset and interfere in other ways that folks can have self-determination to move forward in their lives. And so we know that this has been a long-standing practice, that racism has been has permeated in the housing sector, specifically around people of color who have struggled to maintain and build generational wealth by home ownership. And so we know that a large portion of the folks who are impacted in housing, tend to be people of color, and those who may actually be on a poverty scale beyond BIPOC. I'm seeing some comments, and thank you, Margaret, for also sending some information to raise up the conversation around redlining and other government policies that have prevented BIPOC community members from building the generational wealth that I mentioned earlier. There has never been any reset in the system to accommodate the fact that we know that that's when most Americans, having come back from the war, were able to start to realize the American dream and have home ownership. That was not made available to many of us in this country. And so there's a gap and where many of us have been able to move forward with, not only having stable housing, but creating generational property that we're able to pass down to our families. And that has not been the experience of all Americans. There's also, Margaret, thank you for mentioning about mass incarceration of BIPOC members of our community, which also limits opportunities for education and jobs and housing opportunities. And because we know of this history, what can we do to move forward so that we're not ignoring the fact that these are impacts, but moving forward to make sure that future generations don't continue to have experience from these impacts. And this is the work of CT RAN, and what we're hoping through your organizations, we're going to be able to, in this state, is doable. In a state as small as Connecticut, with the resources that we have, is doable for us to combat and start to see what we can put in place for future generations, the next set of youth that are coming behind us, so that we're not still being impacted by these same practices of the past. So I'm going to go ahead and move to the next question. Again, if you have thoughts, ideas, if there are things that you would like for us to address or to potentially, have future sessions on, please make sure that you're communicating in the chat so that we can capture this information after this webinar, and we'll be able to follow up. So the next question is, what roles can advocates, policymakers, allies, and housing leaders play? So that's why we're here, and this is why we hope that you're here to help us to combat all of these, disparities that, continue to be an issue, not just in Connecticut, but throughout the U.S. What kind of policies or practices or, decision-making can we do at the various levels and throughout the government and nonprofits and private practice and, throughout our communities as a whole? What can we be doing to make sure that these policies no longer continue? We're all made aware of the practices of the past, but what are we doing to make sure that those practices don't continue? And so what we're going to be looking, my hope is, throughout the next year or so with this upcoming legislative session coming up, that you'll join us when we're meeting with advocates and policymakers, allies, and other housing leaders to ensure that we are addressing these at the state level. If there are still zoning practices, redlining practices that continue, and I think if we're all honest with ourselves, we know that those things still exist. What can we be doing as individuals, and what can we be doing as community members to make sure that we are helping to dismantle those practices so that we don't continue to see housing disparities continue? Are there any chat items, Amber or Carlene?
Yeah, we have several people that put responses. So different things that people can do is listen, right? That's the starting place, just listen. Also being active in community engagements, informing the communities of resources, having equitable access to resources, and then checking in. Also advocating for those who cannot advocate for themselves, share stories with those who make policies, encourage those in the community to speak up because personal experiences make the biggest differences. Yes, indeed. Credit scores play a huge part as well, is why it's difficult for BIPOC to purchase homes. Voting, using our voices, reviewing data regularly, seeing what does our data, what story does it truly tell?
Wow, those are truly amazing thoughts, and I appreciate those that are sharing in chat. Again, please, this is our opportunity, even though we're not able to interact with you because of the limitations of the webinar. We want to hear from you on what are some areas that CT Ring can really be a strong supporter and advocate on behalf of all of us that are interested in this work, but certainly for those people who are disproportionately impacted by these policies. I also see from one of my colleagues, Felicia, that she wanted to make sure that we express and that we should be evaluating additional existing policies for biases that produce racist outcomes. And we know that these policies can be internal policies that are happening within our own organizations, our own, not just state and local government, but they can be policy decisions that are being made throughout your organization. If these aren't areas, if you're in this work and these aren't areas that your organization, that your leadership are discussing, talk to us about what we can do to help those discussions and those dialogues begin. Because if policy still exists where we're not addressing and we're pretending or ignoring the fact that there are long systemic racist policies and legal actions that are not allowing people to move forward, we're going to continuously have these conversations. And so we want to make sure that we find a place, we get the right people in the room so that we can certainly make sure that we go beyond just policies, beyond legal ramifications, but we really do look at where we sit in our roles and our jobs, and we're making sure that policies, procedures, training, are reflective of dismantling racism as well. So I'm going to go ahead and move to the next one. Keep the ideas flowing, please. We want to interact with you as much as possible to capture as many ideas and thoughts as we move forward, as we're looking about future programs and future trainings. So the next question is, what are some challenges and advantages of moving to an anti-racist approach? So this is a question for that's for the ages. What's the benefit of dismantling racism? What's in our work in housing, or even in other areas of our lives? What are the advantages and challenges that we have about moving to an anti-racist approach and what we do? Why should people care about this? Why is this important? Please share your ideas in chat. Feel free, if someone wants to speak up, raise your hand. We'd love to hear your voice as well. But definitely put some ideas and thoughts in chat so we can share those. And Amber, if you want to let me know if you're seeing some ideas that we can share, that would be great.
Yep, so fairness, fair, and facts.
All right. Any other advantages of why it's important for us to do this work? I mean, this country has been here for a long time, and we've talked about, the history of slavery and discrimination, for hundreds of years. And but here we are still in 2022, still talking about it and its impact on people and why it's important. One of the things that I always say in one of my other hats that I wear, I'm a city councilor in Meriden. And one of the things that I challenge my other colleagues on council and in our community is that racism is the work of everyone, because when we're all doing well, then there's less crime, there's less, educational disparities, there's more harmony in our community. There are opportunities to see everyone get an opportunity to rise. Despair, crime, and poverty, does create, challenges on communities. And so if we're not all invested in looking at ending racism, then we shouldn't expect that crime and despair and health cost and other things that are just impactful from racism, will hurt the entire community. No one lives in a vacuum. Things that happen to our neighbors do impact us. Are there any other questions? Anyone else want to share any thoughts that we should capture in this area?
Yeah, some other feedback is the point that we can't end homelessness without addressing race equity and racism and the effects of it.
Absolutely, and that's at the end of the day, that's exactly why we're here and why we're talking through this right now, because homelessness disproportionately impacts Black and Brown and others in the state, and any impact on one is going to have an impact across all of us, because we have to pick up those costs, whether it be through additional supports and shelters or substance abuse and other areas. So it should be a shared community thought around how we approach helping people and ending racism, because there's just a community cost that we'll continue to reap if we don't do this work together.
We also have a note that people need to challenge their own belief, even if it's only to ask themselves why.
That's an excellent point. Some of us don't know how racism impacts us. There are many of us that may or may not have a lot of interactions with people from different backgrounds. And, part of growth as an individual should always be about how you have personal growth into who you are and how you move about the world. But people should keep in mind that your growth, your development, your interest does have an impact on those around you. And so that's also a very important point. Any other thoughts or ideas before I move on to the last question?
I have someone that I'm going to unmute.
Okay, excellent.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we
Yeah.
can.
Hello? Hi.
Yes, we can.
Thank you for this information. Thank you for this information. One of the things that I'm sitting here is the denial that I see around me. I grew up in a family, we call it around the way, but there was a sense of community, and I think that for the most part we don't have that anymore because of the type of world we live in. And I think advocacy, I think empowerment of getting involved, whether it be politics, just being a part of the community conversation and teaching that to our children at such a young age. And the more we think that it doesn't exist, the more we fool ourselves. And housing is such a big issue. I work with the homeless shelter. I also work with the substance use population. And there is hope as long as we continue to let people see that there's no hope. The more we lose this battle. I think people of color have contributed more than their share. I think that we ought to live in if they're building, the most sad thing for me right now is in New Haven, all these luxury apartments, all of these luxury apartments that they knew they couldn't fill that are now on the market for a 1-bedroom at almost $1,800 that some of our folks who don't even earn that can't even afford. And yet the homeless rate goes up for individuals and families. And they built that to separate us. And now they can't fill those apartments with their class of people. They're putting it out to us, but we can't afford it anyway. And so it's unfortunate people are homeless and there is housing out there, they just can't afford it. And I think the more that we encourage one another to take part in knowing what's going on in your communities, lift your windows up, don't close your doors, because we have a right to fair housing, whether we want to own or not, but we have a right to educate ourselves, and it's time to teach our children the value of credit, the value of wanting to be who they want to be and being a part of this world, and most important, being a part of their community. And so that's what I wanted to say.
Thank you. I'm sorry, your name again?
Sylvia Cooper.
I'm sorry, Hildia?
Sylvia, Sylvia. Sylvia.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Sylvia. I mean, all of your comments and points are so well thought out and received. One of the first things that I wrote down as you were talking was about the fact that, and it's a true statement, that people of color have carried the burden of trying to end racism because they know what it's like to live under such, harsh and unfair practices. And we do need allyship, and we do need people that are not a part of the BIPOC community to help us in moving forward a lot of this work, because there has been an unfair, expense put on the backs of people of color to educate folks about why these practices have been so harmful to our communities. I so appreciate your comments about the fact that there are a lot of discussions that take place in communities, specifically in Connecticut, because of the wealth gap, that even in my community, we struggle with the discussion about the fact that we know that there's a housing shortage throughout this whole state, but no one wants to address affordable housing. And the only projects that most of us are interested in moving forward with are, like the projects that you're referencing, luxury and looking for market rate, or looking for a class of people who may or may not be able to move and to afford. And so that's an issue that hopefully through your help with working with advocates and policymakers, with a lot of our housing leaders that have continued to just have these discussions, that we can start addressing that. We can't put our heads down and pretend that there's eons of people moving forward, especially coming out of COVID with some of the issues that we, are continuing to have the effects of. There are a lot of people still struggling, and to be tone deaf and only build housing that is for those that have higher incomes is extremely not beneficial, and in some cases I would say is detrimental to communities, as you explained. So thank you so much, Sylvia, for speaking out. I hope that you'll take our information and certainly continue to have a dialogue with us, or possibly even become a member of CTREN. So thank you so much for your comments. Are there any other comments before we move to the next and last item?
I have a few others that would like to say something. Tahira, I'm going to go ahead and unmute you.
Sylvia, you got them started, Sylvia. Good. Let's hear it. Who's speaking?
Amber, I don't know. Did I raise my hand by accident? I think I did.
Okay. All right.
But you're talking. You got something to share?
I don't. I'm just listening to you guys' points, and they all make sense.
All right. Well, thank you anyway. Are there any other hands up?
No.
All right. So we'll move to the last question, and this is one that has been on my mind for a while, and I've been really challenging and pushing the CTREN team to for us to address. So we know in this time place, especially following the George Floyd, incident and murder and the racial reckoning that took place afterwards, that a lot of organizations, opened their eyes and said, we need to be doing some work around equity and inclusion. And so we see a lot of organizations, probably many of yours, that are now looking at their hiring practices, looking at their leadership, looking at ways in which they can have a more inclusive voice with BIPOC members. However, we also have to be very clear that we're also not tokenizing our BIPOC community and only rising and bringing them into roles to fill quotas or to have a checkbox. And so the question is, how does tokenism show up in the workplace, and what are some ways to mitigate it? And this is probably a longer discussion that we'll have at some point, just so we can make sure that those of us that are starting from the BIPOC community, that are starting to see more opportunities open up for us, are not put in situations where we feel singled out or tokenized because we're a person of color, and we potentially are being viewed as someone who can speak for an entire population of people because we are BIPOC. So talk to us a little bit about your experiences in your workplace or in other workplaces. How does tokenism show up in the workplace, and what are some ways to mitigate it, and why is that important as we talk about representation and leadership for housing and instability? And I'll give you guys a minute to throw some things out there, because that was probably quite the charged question. Amber, let me know if you see any thoughts or items coming up in chat. One of the things I also want to make sure, as we talk through this, part of CTREN's mission and role is to make sure that we are being supportive to BIPOC members, specifically around this topic. We want to make sure that as we are seeing members and people of color having opportunities to operate in various places in the work that we do, that there are supports for them, and that they do feel a connection, and that they are, feeling that these opportunities that might be opening aren't just, token items, but they really are, their voices are being heard, that they are, being representative of the communities that we support, and that, these are long-standing opportunities and growth for BIPOC, for the BIPOC community. Any questions, Amber?
Yep, so we got some feedback where someone just points out that unfortunately some nonprofits rely on some of the grants that ask for data, and that kind of makes leaders look to checking the box in order to access those funds. And although we want the grants, I'm sorry, I'm adding on at this point. Although we may want the grants, we need to get away from checking the box and really put in the work and really put in the policies and really have our staff and have our work represent itself instead of checking the box in order to access the funds.
Amen. I totally agree with that one. We know that we know that there's benefits because there are targeted monies, funds, state, local, federal, that want to make sure and ensure there's diversity, but we have to make sure that if we're going after those funds, that we are looking at dismantling systemic systems and not just chasing money to help sustain our existing, organizations. Are there any other questions? Any hands up?
We have a very long one. And I'm asking if they can unmute. I think it will be best if they speak to that instead of me reading it. So 1 second.
Very encouraged that so many of you are willing to speak up. These are difficult topics, so I appreciate the feedback.
Audit. Thanks, Amber. Hey, Sonia, it's Chelsea. How are you?
Hey, how are you?
Good. I added in the Q&A that I just really appreciate this question. The conversation about representation versus leadership, I think, is super important. I've been a part of so many groups and tables that stop at the conversation about representation and in a really inauthentic way, like scrambling last minute to add a person of color to a panel versus starting from a place of inclusion and making space for the expertise and leadership of expert people of color. And I added in the Q&A that as a white person and existing in a lot of white circles, I think oftentimes white people in power are not in community with people of color. And so they just do not naturally think or uplift their expertise. And so I think you asked what are some of the ways to mitigate that, is starting from the place of, looking outside of the typical folks that we tap for, elevating voices, all those things. Looking outside of our segregated circles is one way that we really need to commit to doing that and moving beyond representation.
Thank you, Chelsea. And I so appreciate you saying that, not, just because I know the role that you serve and the outreach of the work that's done by the partnership. But, I'm grateful that there's an acknowledgement that we all have a responsibility, particularly our white colleagues, to step outside of our comfort zone and only tap those folks who we know and people who we're comfortable with. To recognize that sometimes when we're in a room and we're having discussions, that the voices of others, particularly those folks that are reflective of the people that we're serving, CSH and both of the CLCs and the partnership, and as well as CT-RAN and other organizations in housing, we've all been looking to prioritize people with lived expertise. Sometimes that has a racial component, because we know that 37, almost 40% of homelessness in the state of Connecticut, are BIPOC, and we're certainly not 40% of the population. But we also know that sometimes that might involve people who are from different economic backgrounds as well. I'm always, making sure that I'm clear to people that, just because someone has white skin doesn't necessarily mean that they have access their privilege. And so sometimes we do have folks who are with lived expertise that may not be BIPOC, but the point is that we should always make sure that when we have representation, that it truly is not just checking the box and is a token, that we really are looking for those voices, because those are the folks who are probably most likely to help us solve some of these large issues, and bring the voice of their needs and concerns instead of us guessing at what we think might solve some of these problems. And so to Sylvia's earlier point about the sense of community that we should have, if we really can capture that with not just within our own individual communities throughout the state, but in our housing community, if we can really harness and capture the sense of community, looking after everyone that we know, are reflected in the state of Connecticut, I think this work that we're doing to end homelessness will be so impacted because we'll be looking at all the ways that folks are impacted that cause them to fall into housing instability and homelessness. So I'm going to stop real quick because I think this discussion went so well that we might be a little bit over where we are. Are there any other questions or thoughts or chats that folks want to?
We do.
Before
Sylvia would like to make another point, and while she unmutes, I'll just say we did receive several others that commented about how organizations talk about diversity and inclusion. However, there's not much diversity within that workplace. And then there's also decisions and conversations being had without people of color actually being included in those conversations, and that's really instrumental.
Awesome. Okay. Well, thank you so much. I'm again going to encourage those that are participating to continue to stay in touch with us so that you can continue to have these discussions with us. We're going to go ahead and move on to the next session where we talk about what are some national efforts that are taking place. So if you can advance the slide, Amber, thank you. So the National Coalition to End Homelessness has helped to serve specifically for some of our REN action steps to provide some of these areas where we think, what are some active things we can do beyond that's going to extend beyond us continue to just have trainings and discussions around how we end homelessness. And if I could get someone to put the link in the chat so that everyone has access to the same document that I'm looking at. The Alliance's Racial Equity Network action steps list out these 5 items, which include some long-term action steps that individuals and organizations can do, but also what are some short-term things that we can do as well. And so I'll just quickly walk through a couple of these, and then if there are any thoughts that possibly those that are looking at this feel that might be left out, we welcome you to share those with us. So system entry is one of the largest efforts as we're looking at housing disparities. We need to understand how people are entering into the homeless system, and we know that there are a lot of data, and there's other places where we can do this work. We know there's still a lot of work that needs to be done around capturing the right data. And one of the areas that I'm specifically interested in is that we know that the public systems such as corrections, foster care, healthcare, military, we know that those are areas that there's a lot of data around. If we can really harness data to help us understand how people are entering homelessness, I think that will help us to look at ways in which we can look at how solutions should tie into that. A second area is the crisis accommodation. We need to identify who's getting the shelter and that transitional housing. And part of this discussion is that sometimes people who are getting housing are the loudest voices or the people who know how to access the system. That doesn't necessarily always equate to BIPOC community people receiving the same services that might be available to others. And so for those of us that are in systems that are helping to identify who's getting shelter, we're really asking that policies be looked at so that those individuals and those organizations are identifying when they're not seeing the same number of, at least percentage-wise, the same number of BIPOC community members getting shelter and staying in housing at the same rates that we might see some of our white counterparts. There's the third area is looking at permanent housing. Again, we need to make sure that we're keeping good track of are there any racial and ethnic disparities in permanent home placing? Are we seeing that there are disproportionately less BIPOC that are staying in long-term housing? Are they only getting mostly into shelter care? Is the voucher system, does it seem to be equitable based on the numbers? And, you know, we're really looking at organizations that have access to this information and that do placements and that give out vouchers are looking at this data and keeping track of, you know, what these disparities look like. You know, do we have models that are addressing landlord discrimination? We were at a quality review at one of our provider sites yesterday, and it was one of the topics that kept coming up, is that we know that there are a lot of landlords who, even though people may have a voucher, who might discriminate. So what can we do as a system to make sure that that doesn't happen? The fourth point is the return to housing, to identify, you know, who are becoming homeless again. You know, we know that sometimes this is a cycle for some people. Are we looking at barriers that might prevent or ban people from, you know, returning to services? And we know that this probably happens a lot in corrections. This may be happening in youth services and the foster care system. We know that there might be folks who are on the mental health spectrum who might be, you know, continuing, and, you know, with substance abuse might be continuing clients. What are we doing to address when we do have people who are cycling in and out of the system and don't seem to have a plan that allows them to be stabilized at some point? If you're an organization, or if you work for an organization that, you know, has these clienteles and have these experiences, what are we doing to make sure that we move beyond that instead of just allowing that cycle to continue? And then the last area is, what are some organizational steps that we can take within your organization, within you personally, within other organizations that you might be associated with, within our state and local government? What are some things that we can all do and start to champion to make sure that we're improving our own racial equity practices? All of this work, you know, as people always say, you know, true work begins at home. You know, you should be looking at your own individual self as well as the organizations that you associate with. Are they doing the work that's going to help fulfill the mission of truly trying to end homelessness for all and provide equal access and experiences to all? You know, we need to make sure that within your own organization, if you're following on the sheet, these are really great areas, and I would suggest that everyone print these and bring them back to your organization. Really look to identify within your team, within your organization, who's leading this work. This racial equity work can't be, you know, only pulled off the shelf when we're having these discussions, or if you're having a meeting directly with BIPOC or funders who are looking for this work. We really want to make sure that this is built into your organizational structure, and that these are continuous conversations that are happening through all the work that you do. We here at CSH are looking to become an anti-racist organization. Every aspect of all of our work is being scrutinized for how we're addressing race equity throughout the work we're doing. Otherwise, we're doing exactly what others do, and we're only pulling it off the shelf when there's a need for, or when someone is actively looking to engage BIPOC community members. So I'm gonna, again, I dare, if the link is in your chat, you all have access to this PDF. I would advise that you print this off. If you're in a leadership position, I would suggest that this be a starting point for you and your organization. If you are not in a leadership position in your organization, I still say you print this and you bring this into your next supervision meeting with your boss, and you figure out how you can implement this plan in the work that you do, so that next year when we're having this discussion, we're going to be talking about what steps your organizations are doing that's helping to eliminate these barriers. All right, any questions or chats on that before we move forward?
Actually, no, we don't have any response from that.
All right, so again, this is exactly what we just talked about, really just hoping that you all are you know, encouraged and you know, truly present in this discussion with us. First and foremost, we're going to ask you, there's always a call to action. You guys know I'm in politics, so I'm always going to pull that out. So we definitely want to make sure that you guys are you know, here with us as we're continuing this work today and throughout. So I'm going to let Margaret, you know, help us get you guys involved and hopefully help you understand how you can get involved.
Thanks, Sonia. It's my pleasure to be here today as part of this group. And you haven't heard from me today because I am not an expert on advancing race equity, but I am learning. And so the reason that I'm in charge of the call to action that says join CT-REN is that you do not have to be an expert on advancing racial justice to be a part of CT-REN. You have to be committed to wanting to advance racial justice. And that's certainly been my experience of being a part of the group, is that I've learned a lot. And I think Chelsea already said it extremely beautifully and with a lot of passion, that you know, addressing the historic oppression of people of color in our country and the manifestations that we see of that every single day in our community is not a problem of BIPOC people. It is a problem for all of us, and it's not an issue that BIPOC people can or should be addressing on their own. White people have to be part of that. And I can just say for myself that sometimes talking about race in our society and in our organizations can feel really fraught and difficult and confusing. And I think I can speak for myself as a white woman who's been given a position of authority. It can sometimes feel like, you know, I'm going to step into something that I don't totally understand, or that I'm going to make a mistake. And I think we so I would encourage anybody else who has ever had those feelings, or, you know, is a white person who is committed to racial justice in our field, to join this group, to come to these meetings, to like swallow your discomfort and just, you know, get over yourself enough to come and express your values by putting your time where your commitments are. I think that's my call to action.
That's your call to action. Thank you so much, Margaret. And to just go into more detail about Margaret said, yes, we need allies. This is not only our work. It's not just people of color. We need allies. We need others to be involved with this work. So please, allies, anyone, just join us and join CT-REN, be a part of this work that we are doing to try to advance race equity. Sonia's been talking for a bit, so I figured I would give her a break. We also want you all to join our future CT-REN webinars, trainings, and discussions. We will be sending out additional trainings. We will be sending out membership information if any of you are interested in becoming a member of CT-REN and continuing to have these conversations with us. And then most importantly, the call to action is to actually begin taking action steps, right? We've all attended the trainings, we've all had the conversations, but what else are you doing? The trainings is it's step one. It's not the end, it's step one. It is, and for some, unfortunately, it was literally checking the box. We need to do more besides just checking the box and actually put in the work and take those action steps. So as Sonia went over that form, it really gives some very concrete action steps of what we can do within this sector, what steps we can take to look at our data, what conversations we can have, how we can look at our inflow and outflow in the shelters. So take a look at that, look inward of yourself as well as your organization and see what action steps can you all implement. So this was our overall, just very high level overview of CT-REN. We talked about many different issues and concerns of things that we need to address. We will be having additional trainings and just conversations that's smaller format so that we can hear more from you all and it can be more engaging. So at this point, we're going to open it up for any questions, any comments, any feedback. I did receive several questions. So yes, this webinar is being recorded, and the webinar as well as the slides will be available on CCEH's website in our webinar library. I'll also attach it so that those of you that registered, it should go out in the follow-up email from GoToWebinar. However, sometimes it's funny how it happens. So if it doesn't go out in that follow-up email, you can find it in our webinar library on CCEH's website. And then I have attached the link for CTREN membership form. Can someone put that in the chat and share it out to the group? If you would like to join CTREN, you can complete that form. And then if you have any additional trainings, technical assistance needs, any membership information, anything in that sort, you can contact us at ct.wrennetwork@gmail.com. That is a shared email that we all have. If you would like any individual email, you can also contact us through that as well. So at this point, I'm going to open it up and see, does anyone have any questions, any comments? If you want to raise your hand, please feel free to do so. And any panelists, if you have anything additional that you would like to share, as I am looking for questions.
No, I just want to say, I just want to thank the organizers, Amber, Margaret, Bobby, Felicia, Carlene, Janita, and Luz, who aren't able to join us. You know, the work that, you know, we've been doing, we all run a lot of organizations and do lots of other work beyond CTREN. This is a complete volunteer experience for all of us. And I'm just grateful to have you helping to continue to push the work and continue to keep the community appraised of what CTREN is doing and how they can be active, and how we can continue to do the equity work that we know is so needed throughout the state. So I thank you all for your leadership, and I thank you for the opportunity to work with you.
Thank you. Same to you, Sonia. We do have one person, Sylvia, I'm going to unmute you.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you so much for providing this webinar. This is a passionate subject for me. I'm an advocate in just across the board because I do speak up. One of the things I want to say, I don't think in our near future we'll be able to end homelessness, but I think there's ways in which we can achieve the goal. And I know that our population is more vulnerable than some, but homelessness is homelessness. But I think creative solution, be opposed to our local, state, and federal leaders, that there's a way to solve problems and that we can curb homelessness. And when we put it in their lap and strongly encourage them to look at those ways. And there's in New Haven, and I've been talking to the mayor about this, there are a number of landlords who own properties that have abandoned them because of their back taxes, whether they live here in New Haven or out of state. They're sitting there. They're a sore eyesight for our communities. And I said, what you own the property now? There is a solution. We can create programs for housing for people to live in those vacant buildings. And so just having a solution instead of, you know, for me going to say what we can do, I have a solution. I have a solution and here's what we can do. And so having more of those conversations and having people who actually are impacted by the issues be a part of the conversation. So that's what I want to say. Thank you so much for opening up this this panel, because I can talk all the way to Thanksgiving about this, but thank you again so much.
Great, thank you, Sylvia. Anyone else, feel free to unmute, send me a message.
I think I just wanted to continue doing the echoing of thanks. Sonia, thanked all of the team members who are here participating, but I also wanted to say thank you to all of you for showing up. And we truly appreciate you all's interest in learning more about what you can do within your organization, within the work that you what you're doing at the local, statewide level. And it means a lot to us. So continue to show up for future workshops. Join us if you can. This is one of the best groups to be at. I mean, I'm speaking for myself. I'm a little bit biased, but it is one of the best groups to be at every other Monday at 3 p.m. That's when we connect, and it is fun. So it's good to be working with like-minded people who are passionate about this work and really want this to work.
Thank you. I think I have one other person that I'm going to unmute. Okay. Shakima, I think you are unmuted.
It's a webinar. They can't see me.
Hmm?
It's a webinar. They can't see me.
Okay. You're unmuted.
I already talked. I already talked.
Unmuted. One second. Let me see who that is. Bear with me, guys, please. I'm sorry. For some reason, I'm not seeing you on my list.
Well, Amber is dealing with that. We just want to let folks know that we had a huge response, and we're grateful for those who showed up today. And that's still on here, you know, a few minutes after. That shows that you definitely have an interest and continue the conversation with us. Make sure that if you get an opportunity to send an email, even if you're not ready to join CT REN, please send us an email. We will follow up with you. Any questions, any ways that we can help moving forward. And just very grateful for the huge outpouring of support for the work. And I'm looking forward to meeting more of you.
Can you hear me now? Hi,
Yes.
this is Shakima. Yes, my hand was up for a while, but it's fine. I just wanted to say thank you to you guys for this information session, pretty much. And I am looking to join CT REN. Just to piggyback off of Sylvia, I am one of the type of people who typically will speak up. And I have also noticed a lot of the things that are being said. And I just had a conversation with the coworker yesterday about funding. Like, how come there is no funding, like, to buy buildings just to house people, even if it's something more temporary? Like, you know, there is a lot that can be done, but like, why is it not being done? You know, like, why is there so much money going into building up these expensive buildings, but then you have people who are displaced and there's no help for those people? So I just was like gonna piggyback off of what Sylvia was saying. Those are my exact thoughts as well. And thank you, guys.
Thank you. So we are actually over time. As you see, there's so much that needs to be discussed when we're talking about advancing race equity and what that truly entails. So thank you all for staying on for this additional time with us. Thank you for just being here and being present and having this conversation with us. We hope that many of you, all of you, join us for future trainings, future discussions. Please look for our email that will go out with additional information. So thank you all so much for being here. We are going to close out. You all have a great day. Thank you.
Thank you.